The election of 1892 was significant for several reasons. Number one, we see one of the largest voter turnouts in history. Almost 75% of the American voting populace showed up for this election. And the reason why? Economics was on the table. The debate over the gold standard and tariffs was the primary focus of this election. And it was a rematch between sitting President Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland, who was actually running for his second term as president. It also marks the beginning of the end for the Gilded Age. So let's get started. The biggest issue on the table during the election of 1892 was bimetallism. Bimetallism sets a standard of our monetary policy where our dollar is equated to both gold and silver. Now, it was specifically the farmers who were pushing for a silver standard to stand alongside a gold standard. And with regards to silver, it had always been part of our currency. However, it had fluctuated in the amount that was available over time. If you remember correctly, the Coinage Act of 1873, also called the Crime of 73, demonetized silver. The government just stopped making it. But then later in 1878, to kind of curb some of the economic woes we were having, the Bland-Allison Act was passed, which allowed for limited coinage of silver, about $2 to $4 million worth per month. And then finally, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act is going to be passed. Now, this is going to be in a response to the Farmers Alliance and the Ocala demands, as well as the rise of the Populist Party. And what happened was the U.S. Treasury agreed to purchase 4.5 million ounces of silver per month. The problem is this is going to overvalue silver, basically make it seem worth more than it actually is. With that, we're back in the debate of having a gold versus a silver standard, and both had benefits and both had problems. For instance, gold was a very sound currency and it supported a stable economy. Now, who liked it? Bankers, creditors, investors, those who relied on a sound currency. But it's going to hurt people trying to borrow money or who owe money, specifically in the 1890s, the farmers. Silver, on the other hand, expands credit that's available to everyone. It ended up increasing prices of crops, and borrowers and debtors really benefited from having the coinage of silver. The Western farmers really are going to push for this, hence the rise of the Farmers Alliance and the Populist Party. But it's not liked at all by bankers or creditors because they're basically getting paid less money on the loans that are owed to them. So in the 1892 election, this is going to be the hot topic. Grover Cleveland is going to support the gold standard while sitting President Benjamin Harrison wants bimetallism. They also debated about tariffs. Grover Cleveland wanted to lower the tariffs, whereas Benjamin Harrison wanted to increase them. Another big characteristic of the 1892 election is we actually have a populist candidate, the first and only presidential populist candidate, James Weaver. He is coming from a coalition of farmers and labor unions who all came together in Omaha to form the Populist Platform, also known as the Omaha Platform. And so you're going to see that he is actually going to win electoral votes in a lot of the western states. But it's going to be Grover Cleveland who wins this election. And he might not have wanted to, because the first thing he has to deal with is an economic panic in America. The Panic of 1893, one of the worst in history. The Panic of 1893 was caused by the fact that our gold reserves fell below $100 million. On top of that, one of the largest railroads in America, the Reading Railroad, went bankrupt. When all this started happening, foreign investors who had been putting money into the rise of industry and other investments in America started to pull their money out. America was kind of seen as a bad investment. The impact of the Panic of 1893, unemployment is going to hit 18.4% nationally. New York City alone sees a 35% rate of unemployment. You're going to see businesses fail all over the place. 16,000 businesses are going to declare bankruptcy, and 500 banks are going to close. We've talked about this earlier. As banks close, that has such a negative effect on the economy, and you end up in this negative cycle that is very difficult to get out of. Another major impact of the Panic of 1893 is going to be the Pullman Strike. The Pullman Strike occurred when workers of the Pullman Palace Car Company go on strike because while their wages were decreased, their rent and expenses for living in the Pullman town stayed exactly the same. When they go on strike, other railroad workers across the country join them, and our rail service starts to come to a stop. Coxey's army is going to be formed in 1894 as a response to this, or more so to get a response out of the government. They're going to march on Washington, and a lot of people are going to refer to them as hayseed socialists because what they're marching for is government-created jobs. They're looking for the government to create public works jobs that would pull people out of unemployment. A lot of Americans are going to cheer these folks on as they march to Washington. However, when Jacob Coxey and his followers arrive in Washington, D.C. and march on the Capitol, Grover Cleveland is going to order their arrest for trespassing on federal property, as well as order the army to break up the rest of the protesters. But we're still in the midst of this economic panic, and J.P. Morgan is really going to come to the rescue of our country. One of the causes of the economic panic will be the depletion of our gold reserves. And on top of that, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act is going to be repealed in an attempt to drive up the value of the dollar. Now, the federal government did consider selling bonds to the general public, but it's really hard to sell bonds to people who don't have jobs. Enter J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan is going to offer to sell $65 million in gold to the federal government. And in exchange, he is going to get a 30-year bond. Basically, he is giving a 30-year loan to the federal government to bail us out of this economic panic. And it works. But a lot of people are not too happy about that because it showed how dependent on gold our country was. Enter William Jennings Bryan, nicknamed the Great Commoner. He is going to appeal to farmers, to labor unions, to the middle class, because he is going to continue to fight for the silver standard. In fact, in his Cross of Gold speech, he is going to attack the gold standard and what it does to the working man. And he's going to end his speech with the statement that you shall not crucify man on the cross of gold. He basically is implying that the government is killing the working and middle class because of this gold standard. He is immediately going to become the Democratic presidential nominee for the 1896 election. And what he's going to do is essentially merge the Democrats and the populists together. He's going to adopt most of the populist platform that was written in Omaha in 1892. They're going to call for free silver and an income tax on the wealthiest. And they're also going to call for an attack on the trust and the injunctions that are being used to put labor unions down. Bryan is going to go on a 26-state tour. We called it his whistle stop campaign to educate Americans about the silver standard and what it would basically do to the value of the dollar in the United States. Throughout this tour, he referred back to his Cross of Gold speech. Having behind us the producing masses, we will answer their demand for the gold standard. You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon the cross of gold. This cartoon famously depicts William Jennings Bryan and his Cross of Gold speech. In the meantime, the Republican National Chairman, Mark Hanna, is going to encourage William McKinley, the Republican nominee for president, to wage what was known as a front porch campaign from his home in Ohio. Basically, it sounds exactly like what it was. McKinley will campaign from his home in Ohio, and the press is going to carry his message throughout the country. McKinley's message was simple. He wanted economic, urban, and industrial growth for America. He said that's the only way we're going to get out of this economic panic is just to grow our economy. He pushed the idea that free silver, the free coinage of silver, would result in the dollar dropping in value to basically 57 cents. He's going to also argue that the Democratic Party has been taken over by the agrarian left. It's the farmers who are making all these decisions for the Democrats, but it's the industrialists who are making all the money and providing jobs for the rest of America. He's also going to play on the patriotism of Americans, talking about how he had actually fought in the Civil War at about the same time that Bryan was still in diapers. The election of 1896 is basically going to mark the end of the Populist Party in America. However, their ideas continued on, specifically the income tax, the secret ballot, and the direct election of senators. Those ideas will actually be enacted by other political parties in the early 1900s. But McKinley does win the election of 1896. So why did Bryan lose? Well, quite simply, he had tunnel vision with regards to that silver issue. And because of that, he didn't spend any time building bridges with the other side, specifically urban voters. And in doing so, he never made any alliances with other groups. He did have some support of unions, but remember, the unions lived in the urban areas, and he had no answer for what they were dealing with. And finally, McKinley's campaign was so well organized by Mark Hanna, it was going to be very difficult to defeat McKinley. Once McKinley takes office, the economy starts to improve, and the Republicans are going to benefit from that. As the economy grows, the crop production is going to improve, and we're going to find new discoveries of gold. That's going to be key. The election of 1896 basically created a block of Republican control for the next 30 years. From 1860 to 1890, Republicans promoted industry. By the time we get to the 1900s, they're going to start regulating it. We're going to see McKinley as an activist president, and we also consider him the first modern president of American history. As evidenced by his campaign, he communicated well with the press, and the press was the constant purveyor of his message. The Spanish-American War is going to happen during his administration, and that's going to lead us to becoming a world power. And the Gold Standard Act, which will be passed in 1900, is going to finally end the silver controversy. So as we're coming out of the Gilded Age, and as we're coming out of the 1890s, we see a lot of change in America. The 1890s started off with a Great Depression with that economic panic, and farmers and industrial workers alike had to face the problems that had been caused by the sudden growth of industry and urbanization during the Gilded Age. And they realized that American life could be improved if we embraced reform. That's going to open the door to the next era, the progressive era, where a lot of that reform is going to take place. Well, that's it for today. Hopefully you learned something, and if not, as always, you can go back and watch this again. Other than that, I appreciate you watching, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. But we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.